Welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host, Neil. In this final part of my conversation with geologist Alicia, we are talking about gender roles. We begin with discussing how Alicia has a bit of a boyish energy in her body language and speech. Then we talk about feminism, patriarchy, gender roles, and self-empowerment in her romantic relationships, work, and life. I feel like you have a bit of a boyish energy within you. Would you agree? Has anyone ever said that?
No one's ever said it. Not that way, at least, but I would consider myself not a girly girl.
Yeah.
But not really a tomboy, like feminine, but I don't think that I'm not natural in like the typical... I'm not like the typical view of a girl.
Yeah.
Dresses.
Yeah. And I feel like I vibe best with and like connect most with people who are neither very masculine nor very feminine. So I don't think it's like an accident. Or it contributes at least a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I've just seen that as a pattern,
Yeah. Well, and I feel like that's interesting because then, I guess, to ask you, what are the aspects of it that are boyish, or what do you typically view as boyish?
Okay, so I was just like sitting here watching you, and I started feeling like, oh, Ali is kind of boyish, and not the first time that I've felt that. Although I don't remember this being my memory of you when you were in Austin, so either I don't remember that aspect of your memory, or I hadn't learned to become aware of that quality so consciously. And maybe, more lately I've thought about it a little bit more explicitly, is like, oh, the gender expression of a person. Before that, maybe I didn't even used to think about that, but could have been subconscious. So what are the things? It's kind of hard for me to articulate. But I think partly like a little bit of your like body language as you sit and the kind of postures. A little bit of it is, I think, the way that you speak. I think there is some gender roles that creep into how women speak in front of men, women speak in front of women, etc. And the way that you speak and your body language, I think these two are connected, actually. Just your like self-expression seems to me to remind you of how like a dude would. And I think it's actually not necessarily something, it's like not really about a boy or a girl. It just feels more free. And I think men are conditioned to just like allow themselves to be more free with their body language, with their speech or something like that. So it could partly be that. Yeah,
that's interesting. And I mean, thinking about it, I have spent over a lot of years, like either interacting. It's like I've kept deeper female relationships, like my mom or something, but not in such a wide, or like a day-to-day type interaction. So I'd say a lot of my day-to-day interactions have been with men for like, I'd say the majority of them for like the past, since I got to Minds, like.
Yeah. I see. And you also, we were going to talk about this a different time.
It's kind of
you
like
live in a world that's dominated by men.
Yeah, it's a good segue to that.
Wait. I don't want to start talking about that yet.
Okay. Oh, yeah. The boyish energy.
By the way, you don't mind that that's getting on the recording?
No.
Okay, cool.
So I think that's interesting because I haven't had anybody say that actually before.
I'm surprised that nobody has said that to you before. Yeah. I think because in appearance, you're quite feminine. So it only comes out more in like your gestures and the way that you speak and your body language. So I guess you would have to be a little bit more observant. than to just see it like, you could have a girl who like looks very boyish. There are plenty of girls who like look, so you don't even have to go and start talking to them or see their body types. Like, oh yeah, she's got pretty short hair, she wears like a guy's clothes, and she's got this whole demeanor that's like the aesthetic presentation is more like a boy. But that's not really the case with you.
Yeah. Well, I feel like sometimes if there's like a different perception that people might get of me from just like, not interacting with me versus how I look. And I think everybody probably thinks of that as like, how do I present myself versus who am I actually? And it's like, oh, like, what types of people do I dress like? Or what types of people do I look like? Or like, how do I typically, Yeah. I'd say like sometimes I do wonder quite a lot, or like I recognize that I do wonder a lot about it, like what other people perceive and like, whether it's how I look or sometimes I think about how I act, but.
Do you think, like, why do you think about that? Do you feel like, are you worried at all about the ways that you might not come across well to other people, or would you want to change how you come across, or does it matter too much to you how other people perceive you?
I think it like the end of the day, like my ultimate goal is to feel confident, but I feel like parts of that I attach to how I look or like how people perceive me. And so I feel like, that how you interact socially with people or like what they think of you to some extent, I mean, it just shapes so much of your life that like if it is some component of something that you want like to feel confident or like, some aspect of it is intertwined with the people that you have to interact with day to day. So I feel like too, like what I've really been trying to do is just be able to like feel comfortable with who I am so that I don't really think as much about what other people think of me.
Yeah.
But that I still like enjoy like interacting with them or like, but that I care more about what I think about myself than what other people think of me.
I really appreciate your honest and clear answers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have been trying to be more clear since we were kind of talking about that earlier. I've been thinking, at least during this conversation, of like, okay, not beating around the bush or like being concise and like getting the thought that I had across. So I'm glad it's coming across clear.
Yeah, nice. Do you mind if like some of these things that have to do with your previous relationship get on this recording?
I don't mind.
Okay, so could we like back up a little bit, and can you describe what exactly where was this particular like point of conflict with this guy when it came to him talking about like the women's issues?
How I felt is that he viewed parts of the movement or like this movement of women who are trying to kind of have people understand just that their experience is different from a man's like in the workplace, and that there are these things. It was kind of like what I felt his perspective. I was like, no, we've already like sorted this out. Like those things aren't really an issue anymore. Or like those things have been addressed. Like those things, just kind of minimizing the experiences that women might have without being a woman himself. And so I think I felt like, so I started reading this book called Lean In. And it was one that, when I shared with him that I was reading it, like he kind of, like an eye roll response. I don't know exactly how the interaction went, but it was like kind of a like scoff of like, oh, there's nothing valuable in that book, or that book's just, it's not, he wouldn't take an open perspective to read it. But I related very closely like with a lot of things in that book, like experiences that I've had as a female, like navigating, school and like work environments and things like that. I found it very relatable, and I gained a lot from reading that book. And I felt like his minimization of things that he hadn't experienced or even tried to learn about, Yeah, go ahead and minimize the book once you've read it.
I see, yeah. So this book, like, was kind of advocating for the idea that some of these systemic issues that women face are also internal to them because of the ways that they have been conditioned, and they share some of the responsibility in educating themselves out of that position. Is that
yeah, so it? How I would describe it, and it's kind of related to like the oil and gas discussion, in the sense that there's a system that imparts, this kind of systemic like gender biases and things like that on us, and that's, there could be, the black and white view would be the system needs to change. Yeah. But what this book allowed you the opportunity to do was recognize the power that you have, that you're not powerless in your situation right now. If it helps you recognize actions or the way that you might be thinking, and just kind of helps you see a path forward to correct those and change your mind, or like change the way you approach situations. Yeah. And so it's not minimizing the fact that these systemic things exist, but there's so much more power in seeing the things that you can do personally. Yeah. And so, like, one of the examples that I really liked from the book was these women who would come, it's Sheryl Sandberg is the author, but these women who would come to her and seeking mentorship, and they'd ask her about, like, career moves. And so they're thinking of turning down a job because they want a family. And, Sheryl asked them, wait, are you even married? No. Are you even seeing anyone? No. So some of these women would be turning down things with the anticipation that 5-10 years from now, they're going to have a family and not want to be that far ahead in their career. So they're already like selling themselves short, or not taking those steps to like move up in management, take a stretch role, or take, advance their career because of the 5-year plan that they have. So it's like, wait, that plan isn't in motion today. What's going to stop you right now? Like, you don't have kids right now. Why wouldn't you take this job? So that's a mindset that people have, that they can recognize in themselves, like women can recognize in themselves, and say, oh yeah, there is no reason right now that, maybe down the line I'll turn down the next job if I have a kid, but there's no reason to start like already starting to take steps back in your career when the situation doesn't require you to.
Yeah. So do you come kind of from that perspective of trying to take as much personal responsibility as possible?
I don't know if I've like thought about what perspective I necessarily take on it. I think that book helped me see that there are those types of things that you can do. And kind of in my day-to-day work environment, I do kind of take that perspective, because it is it's going to have the biggest impact on my career. Yeah. There are still those things, like, I'm almost kind of like see myself as one piece of the puzzle, and like, but that in me changing those things and how I move through the workplace in my career, that it is part of making that progress, and it has to start, part of it is with me, and that's the most power that I can have on the situation.
Because I've seen that when I have asked you about, it must be hard being a woman, especially in like kind of a technical engineering or science world dominated by men, I've seen that your response does not have so much of an energy of blame or pointing the finger, which is like very refreshing for me to hear.
Yeah, and I'd say I've been in only a handful of situations that were blatantly like, I felt very at the expense of somebody, like treating me in one of those, like, just, for instance, like during my master's, like the director of our research group, you could kind of tell some of these like components of gender bias. One was he introduced our research group administrator, who was a woman. He introduced her to the group and called her the team mom. So he calls this lady who has, a very respectable position and does a hell of a job at it. and referred to her as the team mom, as if that type of role is like a mom role or an inherently like female's job. And so we started, I was part of like a 5-student research project, and the same guy, he made me the kind of like, he called me the team lead. And I could very much tell that his interpretation of that was, I schedule meetings, I take notes, I do these things. And there were some instances where it was very clear that that's how he saw me. And that's not what I chose to do. I turned the role into something that, you know, I took charge of it, and I did lead in a very successful way and got a lot of positive feedback to that end, that like I did a very good job with that role. But that's not, and that's kind of one example of how I turned something where it was like, the reason I got that opportunity was because I was a woman, and that was expected to be a secretarial type role. But I turned it into something that was completely different.
Yeah. It was called team lead as a way to like couch whatever.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to give you like.
But then I took that to mean team lead. I'm going to lead this team. So, and part of it was that he didn't clearly define what that role was going to be. He didn't say like, these are the 3 things that I need you to do. I knew that I had to schedule the meetings. I knew I was to some extent tasked with the organization, but it was really a leadership role. And I gained a lot of skills about it, earned respect from the students I worked with, from the faculty, and even got compliments from him at the end of it. But, you know, so I think that's one way that you can kind of take those situations. It's like, yeah, and it's funny because a guy wouldn't have gotten that opportunity because he didn't define it as a guy's role. But in the end, it's probably, if that was the job description that you're going to really lead this team, he probably would have given it to a guy. Yeah.
Have you ever seen if like men have been threatened by you in the way that you like lead or do your job or whatever, you know, break out of expected gender roles? Have you ever seen people who like are kind of like threatened by that?
I don't know that I've ever like directly observed it. Yeah, I don't know. And I think maybe, you know, maybe I'm not perceptive to that reaction or like don't interpret it as such. But I try and honestly, like when I go through the day, it's like I've gotten more so where I think about like the female aspects of it, but I think about it more so in the terms of, okay, how are these people, what would the reaction of the people be to, for instance, how I frame an email? One thing that I've started being very conscious of is how I write emails, where it's like exclamation points, making sure like, you know, reducing those, because I feel like females are sometimes like, being nice, like I'm excitable, like, yeah, like, you know, and so I'm like, you know what, no, like, I'm going to try and reduce that. And I had one of my former residents, she, like, sent me, I kind of act as a mentor to her. She's also in geophysics. But she, like, sent me this email draft that she was going to reply to a company. I noticed that, and in the draft was, like, exclamation points and, like, asking for something, but in somewhat of a roundabout, less direct way. And so when I wrote kind of my draft back of like, okay, here's some modifications, like that's what it was. And like one thing that I've tried to do is communicate to men more so how men would communicate to men, or how in a business scenario. So I think some people or some women have an issue with that, where it's like giving up an aspect of femininity, but when you're like, okay, well, I need to play to like the men's, or fit into the men's context in order to be successful. I don't see that as what I'm doing. I'm trying to identify the parts of femininity that I've been conditioned to do. Yeah. Whether or not they're effective. And it's like, it's keeping me from getting to my goal. And like, I'm not the bubbly exclamation pointy type of person. Dude. But I find myself doing that.
It's so coincidental that you bring up exactly this thing, because that's what I was going to say as my next question is, I was like, I was going to say it in a way that has a lot of potential to like really annoy you, which is my first pass would have been, I think maybe you're having this experience a little bit because you're kind of boyish. And then I remember back to the conversation that we had last night is that I think it's unfair to take those qualities of kind of being assertive, being entrepreneurial, speaking your mind, being free with your body language, gesture, words, action, and just plant a flag on that and say that's masculine. So yeah, I mean, we could give it some other name, but now you're completely claiming it. You're like, yeah, I mean, that's just the way. And that does not have to be something like, oh, men do this and I'm trying to emulate men, which is also the way that I feel in your presence, in our relationship is I feel like the thing that sets me more at ease when I'm around you. And, you were talking about like how quickly we clicked and we kind of got past the initial fluff is I just feel more at ease around you because I feel like you're kind of being yourself. Which, you're like expressing yourself as you authentically are, which I think in our society, men have more of a conditioned license to do that than women. But as long as we define that or keep defining it and limiting it as a man thing, then we're going to be like holding back the potential of what both men and women are capable of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, we see it as that because it is a trait that men typically possess and women typically don't, or at a lesser degree. And so, it's like when a female does something that the majority of that action is performed by men, it's going to fall into that category of being like boyish or masculine because it is something that 90% of when that action is actually performed, it's by a man sort of thing. But like I take it as, because I was in like a focus group discussion sort of thing about, it was like talking about, it was either a book or like a post about the 12 traits that make women like less effective or something like that. And the question, this is what got me thinking about it. The question came up is like, in trying to modify these traits, like these are traits that women inherently or typically possess, and we're trying to go against them. Yeah. Are we giving up some aspect of our femininity? And I think that's like an interesting point that people have to evaluate, because I think where the balance is that you have to look at that trait and that action and evaluate the reasons why and evaluate how true to your values is that action that you're taking. And if it aligns with your values, then of course don't throw it away. But I think what you find is when you start to evaluate yourself in the context of these things that might make women less effective, you start to realize just how many of them don't align with the values or the way that you would like to portray yourself. So it's, yes, they're inherently feminine in the way that like many women act this way, but that's not necessarily how we want to be acting.
Yeah. Because that kind of like that thing, are you giving up your femininity? That word femininity and all its connotations can have the effect of pigeonholing you into, these are the expectations. And I mean, people always internalize the expectations of how they're supposed to be. But what you're bringing out here is that, actually look into what these qualities are. Do I really internally, authentically relate to that, as a woman? Yeah, that's very cool. It's very cool. I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel like there's a kind of brand of feminism that I have a lot of respect for. And that's what you're talking about. This is the kind of brand of feminism. I feel like it's a little less defensive and a little less adversarial. It seeks less to like blame other people, and it seeks more to, just kind of increase one's own awareness, take more responsibility into your own hands. And yeah, I feel like when I encounter feminism like that, the respect I get from that, for that is immediate. No one has to wrestle me into respecting that point of view. Yeah. Whereas some other brands of like feminism that I have encountered are kind of aggressive, and I feel like I have a harder time respecting that. And the harder the time I have respecting that, the more they will try to force it out of me, and the more
you resist.
I resist.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I don't consider myself to like hold, I think part of the reason why I've like adopted this approach to it is that I really try hard not to frame my beliefs or my actions in the context of others. And this is part of why I like kind of isolate myself from social media, why I isolate myself from just things that, you know, the average female my age or average person my age engages in. Is just like, I like to keep more of the focus on like, what is authentic to me? And the way that I kind of do that is by lessening those societal things that kind of show you how you should be or suggest to you how you should be and make you desire it because of how they portray it. And so I just I found very early that like social media was not positive for me. Yeah. So that's why.
But already this thing that you're doing, that you're kind of trying to come out of the definitions of society and expectations, I feel like those pressures of conforming to the expectations, in my experience, those pressures are stronger on women to model themselves after some expectations, to stay within the lines that are defined for them. So this very thing that you're talking about where you're like, okay, I'm just going to define my values according to myself and not in the context of other people's. I feel like in general, women like are in a place where a lot of them, you know, they don't take the opportunity, or they don't have the opportunity of doing that as much as men do. Like the idea of the free exploring protagonist in our mind is still like a male character, you know, whereas the image of the woman, even in its best form, is someone who is like duty bound to care and nurture and whatever, kind of like not the main character person, you know. So
it's so interesting. And like, this was one of the big things, and that my mom recognized early on with too, is like the more traditional mindset about a woman. And he wasn't so overt about it, but it was like some conversations that come up of like, later on, like, you know, that expectation that if somebody's going to sacrifice their career for the sake of the family, it was already expected to be me. And I see it as, no, it could be me, it could be you at any time, but my ideal partner would be willing to, you know, assess our life circumstance at the time that we're ready to make that decision, and be as willing as I will be willing to, you know, to make the best decision for our family, but not have that expected, you know, who's going to stay home and like whose career, you know, we were going to follow his job if he had it his way. And I rebelled against that. I was like, no, one of our biggest problems was he could not accept the decision that I had made to move to Houston. It was like the only way things were going to work for us if I could have that job but be remote and live with him. And I'm like, you know, we can't move forward until you come to terms with the fact that I've made this decision, and I don't want to work 100% remote. I want to be in the office with my coworkers, and that means I'm going to move down to Houston. And until we can face that fact, like, it's going to happen whether we face it or not. But one of the things I had this professor at Mines, and female, and so I started going to her. I really liked her, and like, more so as a person than an actual professor, but I would go to her to kind of have like discussions and get advice, and turned out her advice was a little more biased to her own experience, so I took it with a grain of salt. Her advice being, no, don't get a master's, get a PhD. No, don't go to industry. Like, be an academic. And I'm like, okay, well, you're an academic and you got a PhD, so I think there are clear reasons why you think that's better. But anyway, like, he saw her life as sad. She was single, didn't have kids, put a lot of emphasis or derived a lot of value from her career. And he saw her life as, like, sad and a failure. But I don't know that he would see a man's life in the same exact scope as such. Totally. And men can typically have that, but also have a family, because when they do have that experience, their wife is taking care. And so it's like...
Yeah, so there are two things that come to my mind. The first is just a comment, is that I know that there are a lot of men out there whose ideas are kind of more in line with these traditional gender roles. And if there is a woman who wants to do something that's like really more independent and whatever, and flip the role sometime or have more of an equal role, it makes them nervous and makes them kind of threatened.
And feel less masculine.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like when I hear like about a woman who wants to have this traditional role and they might want to follow me around wherever I go, I feel pressure. I feel claustrophobic, you know. So compared to that, when I hear like, oh, there's a woman that I'm dating who wants to be independent, just like I want to be independent, and they have passions and goals and ambitions in life, if they don't have those, it makes me very nervous. I feel like I don't want to be in a relationship with a person whose life centers around me. That freaks me out, you know? So I think I can only be in a relationship with people, even friendships, where there's something bigger than themselves or the relationship that drives them. So to me, when you were talking about the way that you wanted to be in this relationship, those words sound like relief to me. I was like, oh yeah, this is what I would like to hear. So yeah, I feel like there are men out there definitely for whom something like that would be like, oh yes, a welcome blessing, please.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just have it be more equal. Now, of course, there are logistical difficulties in today's day and age for a couple to be together and for both of them to be kind of ambitious and to follow each of their dreams and manage to kind of stick together. And that's where like a trapeze game comes in of how do you balance your compromises and things like that. But yeah. But I think the sentiment and spirit first of all matters a lot. Right.
And that it's not just that expectation that if push comes to shove, you're at home with the kids no matter what's going on in your career. Yeah,
exactly. So what I'm trying to say is that if men like that try to put forward this notion, and they are in the majority, that this is just how things are, this is what a relationship between a man and a woman is like, and you better get with the program, don't believe it. Do not believe that. That's not true for, like, that's not true for a lot of men.
Yeah.
In fact, for a lot of men, the opposite is like the better option. So, yeah. So the thing that I'm trying to remind you from, on behalf of men, is don't let this be a representation of a uniform recipe that all of us want, you know, out of life.
Well, and it's like interesting because you know, this touches on like other aspects of like how I operate in like a male dominated field, but like through school, I felt like being friends with like my male friends just helped me see so much more clear. Like I remember having conversations with one of my friends, Zach, and at the time like hadn't met yet, and like I told him, because I reflected on this personally and was like, you know what, I really do see myself having kids. Like I see that as something that I want, and I was like, you know what, and I can want that, and if I don't find the right person to like, you know, be my husband, I can still want that, and I can still have that, and I could do it for me, and I could be a kick-ass mom by myself. Like I kind of had that like realization and like felt empowered by that. That's like, I'm not gonna compromise to have like that aspect of my lifestyle to fulfill that desire to have kids, or like, you know, that I don't need to like sell myself short or sell what I want short. And I think some people don't some people may, and this goes for men and women, but they may not think critically enough about what they want or like why they want it to really like allow themselves the ability to have their cake and eat it too. Like, like it's the sacrifice of like, okay, well, I want my life to look this way. And so if that's like my most important goal, then they'll make compromises along the way just to get it. Like I had a roommate in college who her expectation and a lot of it was centered around like family values. She was traditional Southern kind of values. And she like was hopeful of like, you know, she was in a sorority, but like wanting to be like engaged by the time she graduates and like have all of this kind of stuff. And so she just had like an expectation.
She wanted to get her MRS degree.
It's funny. But it was kind of like, for a while, it seemed like it was like, all right, well, insert guy, you know, to get me that. It was more important to have that fulfilled than to have the right person fulfilling it. But I think she ended up realizing, because she didn't find the right guy, that it was as important to achieve the goal as it was to be happy when you do.
Yeah. The other question that I had was, I feel like I initially misunderstood your situation with from the couple of initial descriptions he gave me. My idea was that he was this older guy, intellectually he was kind of an intellectual, he was set in his ways. So I felt like you were saying he knew what the feminism movement was about, and he would like basically talk at you about the feminism movement on behalf of women. And so when you were reading a book like Lean In, which brings some responsibility internal into the women, he was not about that. He was like, no, the system is entirely to blame. But then I started getting a different picture, was like, no, he
wasn't educated in the things enough. Like he had a perception about, it's like I kind of said earlier, it's like, okay, if you had read the book and you have something negative to say about it and you have some evidence to support your argument about it or how you feel about it, fine, I'll listen to you. Yeah. But don't dismiss the book and the concepts that you haven't even looked into. That's how I felt more of that. He felt like he knew the whole story. He got it. He understood it without having to. So what was his position
on this? On what was his eye roll about? What was his position on these issues?
You know, I don't know how specifically I can speak to that because we didn't. The reactions that I got from him, like at the time, I wasn't set enough in my own perspectives to give pushback. So like when things would come up like this, my body would go into retreat, freeze mode. I'm kind of like a freezer sort of thing. I'm not flight. Like I don't need to just like escape, but it's like, you know, I just don't say anything. You know, I won't push back because I'm not as well thought as he is or well spoken as he is. And so it was like, it was always this point for me until like toward the end when I finally got more comfortable like speaking my mind, where it was just like I didn't give much pushback. So he would give like the eye roll, but there wasn't a follow-up discussion of, okay, well, say more, because I didn't invite those because I was like kind of threatened in some way by that perspective and my lack of ability at that time to feel like I could argue my own opinion. Especially when he, you know, like he was just so much, he had that skill much more than I did at the time.
Yeah. I guess the thing that got me confused was because you said that he's an intellectual and he was well thought and well spoken. So I assume that he's a feminist, but he just wants to...
No, I wouldn't.
He just wants to take charge and just define things for himself. So now I'm confused how he can be an intellectual but not be a feminist. Also, if you're going to say things, I would have you come closer.
Just grabbing all the crud. I'd say it was kind of in that spirit of, he took like 10 years between his No, more like 7 years. Like 7 years between his undergrad and PhD, where he went to Europe and like, you know, he went on this self-discovery kind of thing. And so that was like, he's intellectual in the sense that he's very smart. He's a scientist. He's, you know, but he's one that is very base and like, got it figured. I understand it. I've seen what there is to see. I've taken in all the data that I need to draw my conclusions. So he never continued to like challenge himself. Like he didn't challenge himself. He was kind of, the way I saw it is he fell into the like reinforcement bias.
Yeah. Like
constantly like reinforcing what he believed with more things that align with what he believed and dismissing without, or just feeling, and it's kind of like, I prefer to live in the gray area.
Yeah.
100%.
And I feel that it is a little bit of a waste to be in a relationship with a person like you without letting himself be challenged by, you know, so
yeah,
I think that buries some like good qualities that are potentially good things that you can bring into a relationship, like, you know, independent opinions and things like that. And yeah, it was interesting because you know, he could match my level, like, and that's one thing, just like the level of thought of just like thinking deeper, understanding like complexities and workings of things. And so it worked really well, especially like I like was a co-author on one of his papers because I helped him code some figures, plot some things. That's sexy. Academic / personal collaboration.
So, so it's like we matched very well on that level. So when there was like the political levels removed, like the social aspects removed, like the intellectual compatibility was really there, but it was that aspect of the opinionated and personal bias where that challenge and that, because he did respect my ideas, like he did respect my intellect when it aligned with his own.
I see.
And in the sciences, without the opinion that goes into that, and it's more the pure, like, scientific kind of analysis, like, you know, you don't butt heads on those things.
I think this is true. I mean, I don't think I'm in a big position to, like, criticize this guy, because right now what is happening is the same thing. Is like, I'm, like, very welcoming and opening and respectful of your opinions, because they're matching mine. Now, if you were sitting in here advocating more of a traditional role for a woman, I would not be down with you yet. So.
You wouldn't have invited me to talk about it.
So it's kind of true, you know, and it is true that I am very strongly married to my ideas about the world. And I will go to great extents to, like, defend them aggressively. Sometimes it just happens to be the case, maybe, that I'm actually not being challenged by you right now. My ideas are actually not being challenged in the way that his ideas were being challenged by. So it's like, this is easy coasting for me, actually. So I think I should stop before I start patting myself on the back a lot about, oh, wow, what a great feminist you are. Because I don't think, you know, this is, like, really challenging me. If we got on some other topic where you and I, like, actually differed a lot, and my identity was really vested in a lot of those opinions, that's where the real challenge would be.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this is just about ego, you know? My ego is not really being threatened right now in this conversation. You know?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, it's like, I mean, even like, the way that I see my convictions are not having any convictions sort of thing. It's like, I do have like a personal value system, and that's more what drives me than like having convictions about, or trying to at least. Like, I don't try and align myself explicitly with anything that, because like once you align yourself with something, ultimately, you're being put in a group, and that group doesn't exactly reflect your own beliefs. So it's like, I don't even really, like, I I don't know how many people I might have even maybe never called myself a feminist to somebody. Mm-hmm. But I feel like I embody, like, I try to embody, like, the spirit of feminine progress. And I try and, like, push that forward. And so in some way it does make me a feminist. But, you know, it's like... But I think it's interesting just thinking about, like, you know, where do your own convictions come into play and, like, how does that constrain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because, yeah, it is true, the thing that you point out about him. Like, I'm guilty of the same thing. Like, I feel like a lot of my principles and whatever, I am that one. Like, oh, I know, I've thought about this long and hard and I've, you know, explored, and now I know what's right. And I feel like I can't be sure, but I feel like one of the hardest things about being in a relationship with me can be how, like, stubborn I can be about some of my ideas, and really, like, not being very flexible about it, and really putting a lot of my identity behind this, and just being very, like, you know, how do you call it, like, hard-headed or whatever. Yeah. I feel like I've gotten that vibe from people in relationships with me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, because that is kind of how I would, like, describe him. But it's like his opinions didn't align with mine.
Mm-hmm. I guess maybe it works out if you know, if you're both very strongly opinionated, but your opinions overlap. I think that matters in a relationship.
Well, and for him, because I've thought about this. First, I'll come back to that thought, actually. But first I want to say, I think, like, in our discussions, it's like, yeah, maybe our opinions align, but, like, you're trying to understand a different perspective. Like, you're asking the questions in such a way that I'm giving you my perspective and you're open to hearing it. And it's just so happening to fall in alignment with some of the things that you believe. But it's not like you were searching for it to be that way. It was kind of like, and in doing so, you're letting me inform your perspective.
Yeah, I think what makes it easier for me, even though I might be, like, very kind of defensive and territorial about my ideas sometimes, the thing that makes it easier for me to ask you about your opinions is you seem to be, like, kind of open and spacious and accommodating. So you're not responding to my questions, even the questions about climate change and oil, with the kind of defensiveness of your own. Like, if I had started to detect that you're trying to plant your flag, then I would start to, like, kind of butt heads with you. But I noticed that I'm not doing that because you're coming from this more spacious place, and it's just, I'm like, I dig it. I hear what you're saying. Like, it makes me, like, more open. To, like, hearing you out, you know?
Well, yeah, because I would say in that conversation, I mean, your inclinations, at least, or your feelings around, like, oil and gas or climate change are probably not in alignment with mine.
Yeah.
But you're hearing a different perspective about it.
That's true.
And my perspective doesn't come from an emotional reactionary response as most people's or a lot of people's tend to.
Yeah.
And that's just what makes it so hard to have discussions with anybody who is like that, because there just is no really getting through.
Yeah. But what's cool is that for me, I feel like when you come from that more, like, open, spacious perspective, that is much more effective at changing my mind than any other more forceful method would be.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. It's going to be such an unwitting part of this
I know.
galaxy-wide podcast.
Yeah, how many average listeners do you get?
Tens of people. Currently, there are 44 people who have clicked follow on Spotify. But it's hard to measure these things because Spotify is just one of the outlets. And there are, like, other clients that you could be using to follow the podcast, whatever. But I don't think it's a large number of people.
Yeah.
You know? But one day it's going to become very famous.
One day.
People's eyes are going to open to see, wow, this guy didn't do any marketing. And he was just like a solo. There was not a company behind this whose livelihood it was to pump this podcast and do like polished productions. This guy was also doing a PhD on the side. I was just doing but the content is amazing. The people he talks to are amazing, and the things that they talk about are amazing. It's kind of rambly and, blah, blah, blah. But isn't it amazing? We should give him like all the prizes right now. Nobel Prize, Fields Medal.
No, I think it's coming.
Yeah. So one day everyone who has had anything to do with this podcast, even unwittingly, are going to be so famous or infamous or whatever it is. I do have visions. When I was a kid, I wanted to be famous, and then I grew out of it. I was like, that's not the best thing.
Yeah. Depends on how you get there. There's some people who want to be famous, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
How they become famous.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us today in the Room of Lives. Take care. Until next time.